Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee Lavallee McKenna, and I'm here today with Neil Gehani, who's founder of Mind Lumen Health and focuses on ethics and psychedelics and the mental health experience in the Asian community. He's a transplant from being a Silicon Valley tech exec into Thailand. And welcome, Neil. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you, Renee. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us about Mind Lumen.
Right. Mind Lumen is an organization that is going to work as a nonprofit. It has two goals. One goal is to ensure that seekers of psychedelic assisted therapy can be ethically matched or matched to ethical and reputable facilitators and journey spaces and retreats, whether that be above or underground. The second mission of Mind Lumen is to ensure to be the audit and accounting firm for ethics in the psychedelic industry as a whole. And that's sort of our unique capability, that we came up with a way to observe and measure ethics. And this is a talk that I actually gave at Oxford University last year at the first ever bioethics conference program called HOPE, which is Hopkins Oxford Psychedelic Ethics, and now to establish a permanent bioethics center at Oxford University in England. So most people sort of talk about ethics in very, very broad terms, and it's a very nebulous topic, but the key is to make sure that ethics can actually be observed and measured. Not all of it, obviously, but whatever can be, that's a way for us to be able to hold the people in the psychedelic industry accountable for their own ethics. And we are very seeker focused. Unlike most of the organizations in the psychedelic space are very provider centric or provider focused, we are very seeker focused. That means we look at the people seeking the experience and we take that perspective as a priority over all else.
Oh, that's beautiful. Because I know for myself, I run parallel to the psychedelic space. My therapy works directly with the transpersonal, and I have many people who enter the work that I do through psychedelics because it's an excellent tool to allow people to open to the transpersonal and to their own spirituality or the larger consciousness system, who aren't able to access it without some assistance, right? So, and many of my experiences is this lack of integrity across the board with people that might be serving. There's amazing, brilliant, very grounded people, and there's people, I have horror stories, and I'm sure that you have heard them too, of really unethical and even dangerous or damaging behavior happening because people serving aren't in integrity, right? So this is really, really an excellent addition to this growing and cutting edge and really important field. So I'm curious talk to me about ethics and how you guys measure that and how you guys make this safer or more grounded for seekers.
Yeah, so we look at the field of applied ethics and what we call practical ethics. So if you think about ethics as what people, this industry has guidelines. So MAPS has their ethical guidelines, the Guild of Guides does, and there's a whole bunch of other organizations that are working in the ethical, in the psychedelic space that have ethical guidelines, right? And so people adopt them. So when I talk or interview facilitators, they go, yeah, I ask them like what ethical guidelines do you actually, adhere to? And some people will say MAP, some people will say Guild of Guides, some people say APA. It depends on what each of them offers. We don't for our job is not to decide what the ethical guidelines are, because it's not our space, but we review the ethical guidelines and we say, okay, are these ethical guidelines actually, what in these ethical guidelines are actually observable and measurable looking at it from the outside? And that's how we evaluate how good the ethical guidelines are. MAPS is a great organization that does a beautiful work, but if I look at their ethical guidelines, there's not a lot in there that's actually observable and measurable. Whereas if I look at the Guild of Guides guidelines from the Netherlands, right, I can look at their guidelines and people that adopt that, there are things in there that are observable and measurable. And so I can look at it from a lens of saying, hey, if you follow that guideline, it's probably a higher weight than the MAPS guideline. So we would basically assign a higher weight to a facilitator who adheres to the Guild of Guides guidelines or some other ethical guidelines because they are more observable and measurable. And so we can actually observe your behavior and what you do. We're not a policeman because we're not gonna be there like checking everybody. It's not something that we can do practically, right? But it's an honor system. So when we have facilitators in our platform, we want to know that, okay, you said you're going to follow these guidelines. All right, tell me how you're going to actually do that. And we have a way of actually observing and measuring that. So one of the examples I'll take is like, one of the questions we ask a facilitator when we onboard them, say, do you accept the North Star pledge? North Star is like a pledge about how you do ethical business practices. And so we ask them if they've signed the North Star pledge or they're willing to sign the North Star pledge. If they are, then there's a higher weight assigned to that, right? Their reputation score goes up if you adhere to the North Star pledge. We ask them, are you willing to offer sliding scale models? And if you do offer sliding scale pricing, you have a higher reputation. If you do, because we care about access for seekers to get access to care. So we publish our philosophy, right? We basically said, this is our philosophy. We've published it on our site. So that is acting as a guide for us to decide how we create a reputation system for the providers in this network. And the providers also want to save space because they want to know, they don't want to have charlatans in their industry, because if you have charlatans, it kind of ruins it for everyone. A few bad apples can ruin it for everyone. Yep. And we don't want the same thing that happened in the 70s to happen again, because we're in this sort of nascent field that is growing. And we want to make sure that people actually do have access to this wonderful catalyst, that we have, the psychedelics. But like you said, it's a tool. It's a catalyst. Without the therapeutic container, right, it's not very useful. It might as well be recreational, which is fine. I have no objections to people doing it recreationally. But our focus is sort of therapeutic. And when I say therapeutic, I don't mean clinical. I mean therapeutic in both the clinical and non-clinical setting. And we think that there are probably more benefits being in a non-clinical setting than in a clinical setting. So we allow for that, but we want to make sure that whoever the seeker is connecting to is ethical and reputable.
Excellent. I have a mentorship program where I train therapists and healers and energy workers, and I have a couple of psychedelic servers in my program so that they can have more tools both to ground themselves and to be able to provide practical, applicable help to people that have things that come up in their psychedelic experiences. I want to go a little deeper on some of the things you mentioned, because I'm not familiar with them, and I'm going to assume our viewers aren't either. So I'm curious about the North Star Pledge, and I'd actually love to see some of these ethical guidelines. I don't know if you can pull them up on the computer and we can screen share, or if you can just list some of them. So do you know the North Star Pledge off the top of your head?
It's actually it's a long document, so it's not something that's it's a short one. It's actually like it's really supported by the facilitators in the industry. So a lot of the ethical providers kind of adhere to that. Like businesses that operate, is basically a business ethics pledge. So how they would conduct themselves if they're conducting.
Do you know what some of the bullet points of that are? Mm-hmm.
Not off the top of my head. It's a long list. It's not a short list, but if you can think about it as sort of you could think about it on the business operations side. That's kind of what it is. Like things like sliding scale models supported, accessibility, those types of issues are covered in the North Star Pledge.
Is North Star an organization?
It's a North Star is like it's an organization that was started by some people from MAPS, and then they kind of went and did this ethics pledge, and they created this, and they basically sent it out to a lot of the facilitator community, and then a lot of businesses who are in the psychedelic space decided to adopt some of the principles. Right. So there's some principles there, like start within, study the traditions, build trust, consider the gravity, focus on process, create equity and justice, equality and justice, pay it forward. These are some of the principles.
Nice. And what is MAPS?
The MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. So they were the very early pioneers when psychedelics was underground. They started working with MDMA. Rick Doblin was the founder of maps.org back in the late 90s, I think. I think when they got together with people, some of the people in the psychedelic space, like the pioneers, at Esalen Institute and that's how it started. And now MAPS, there's an organization, maps.org, and there's also a MAPS public benefit corporation that's now has a third stage trials of MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD already been approved by the FDA. So FDA is very likely that either late this year or early next year going to allow MDMA and psilocybin as therapeutic. It's on a fast track system. So it's going to make it, so FDA will probably remove that off the schedule, or recommend to remove it off of Schedule 1 so that it can be used for psychedelic assisted therapy, those two substances.
Oh, that's so great. And there was another organization that you mentioned that you felt was a little more cohesive.
Yeah, Guild of Guides. Yes. Guild of Guides in the Netherlands is also, it's a facilitator, a provider organization, and they have their own ethics guidelines and pledge. And the way they write their ethics guidelines is more concrete, is simpler. It's not as long as MAPS is. MAPS is very well known in the U.S. And the Guild of Guides is not really well known in the U.S. It's more European centric. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to look at both sides of it. But most people in the psychedelic space, if you ask them about MAPS, most people will know it and recognize it easily. That kind of thing happens. There's about 22 or 23 cities and counties in the U.S. that have either decriminalized, deprioritized, or legalized psychedelic substances, in the U.S. and 2 states, Colorado and Oregon. So Oregon has, basically decriminalized all psychedelic substances and legalized psilocybin for therapeutic use. Colorado has just last November, passed by initiative that is now all substances are decriminalized in the state of Colorado, and they're working on a regulatory model for psychedelic therapeutic use, right? And I mean, I worked on policy issues in California. Like I worked with Scott Wiener's office and an advocacy organization to get SB 58 and SB 519 passed in the California legislature. I went to the legislators, met with them to educate them on the benefits of decriminalizing psychedelics for personal use and for therapeutic use. So, I mean, I'm a big proponent of decriminalization simply because I think criminalizing psychedelics in particular is actually more harmful. It's more unsafe than if you were to actually decriminalize it. And a very important case in point to mention here is that because people, and most people, you cannot stop people from going and using this underground. The benefits are too powerful. So people are going to do it anyway. There's no way to avoid that. Just because something is illegal doesn't necessarily make it right. It's the stupid law that they made it illegal because there's no real reason to make it illegal. Nixon made it illegal, had nothing to do with the safety efficacy of psychedelics. It had everything to do with racism, had everything to do with the Vietnam War, had nothing to do with safety at all. And now all of that is pretty clear. Most people know that most of the information coming out by the CIA at that time is just wrong. It's just fake. So everybody knows that. Now the internet's out. You can't really hide a lot of things. Information is so readily available. People can get educated on it. But so we focus on education and policy work to ensure that people understand Yeah, you can't just do it willy-nilly, but it's extremely safe. Imperial College of London actually did a study, and alcohol, which is legal, is the most harmful substance both to yourself and to others. Psychedelics is like the lowest harmful substance to yourself, and almost no harm to someone else. Because I just give you another example. I was in an advocacy group with a police lieutenant going to California state legislators. I mean, the police lieutenant said, look, I would rather have to arrest somebody on LSD than I would have to arrest somebody on alcohol, because the person on alcohol is going to be likely to be violent. The person on LSD is super docile.
Well, I will add, as an ex-addict, that there is a shadow side to anything that's mind or mood altering. And I have a person very, very close to me who was clean and sober for a long time, who decided to try psychedelics and ended up homeless, living on the street, doing psychedelics for 3 years. So there is, you can get addicted. And I mean, it's not a physical addiction, it's more of a psychological addiction, but there are, and that was caused a lot of harm to his family. Just to say that there's, it's much less, of course, than alcohol, but it's not like there's not anything mood or mind. Well, we can use anything as humans to some extreme and become pathological with it. Right.
That's right. Exactly.
Right.
Nothing's ever risk free, right? So that you go walk down the street, get hit by a bus. Nothing's ever risk free.
Right.
So we don't talk about it, but we have to. There's a difference between risk free and making sure that people are actually educated about it.
Right.
We do recommend people, like, for example, the seekers that come to us, we advise people if they're under the age of 26 not to do it, because your prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until the age of 26. But if the choices are like, if you're basically, you're going to do it anyway, or if you're going to go the pharma route, and I know in my family, my sister suffers from major depressive disorder, and she was taking pharma meds, and she was out for 6 months, and I could not reach her. My nephew was taking several pills a day. I know people that take 7 pills a day and are like dealing with the side effects of all the pharma medication. So I think the pharma efficacy is actually terrible compared to psilocybin and or MDMA, and that's already proven in the research studies now. So the efficacy is terrible for pharma stuff. So the alternative is way better. And I don't know how the pharma industry is going to do this. The pharma industry is about a $20 billion industry for the mental health side alone, right? So, but to me, pharmaceuticals is like, oh, you got to take it every day. That's the business model. If you don't take it every day, what's the business model? Where psilocybin and MDMA, you don't have to take it every day. You take it maybe 4 times a year, maybe twice a year, right? You don't need to take it every day. This is one of the beauties of taking psychedelic substance for majority of the mental health conditions, other than schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. If you have a history of that, obviously you don't want to be taking it, because you're at risk for psychosis if you're that. But, other than that, whether it's PTSD, anxiety, major depressive disorder, ADHD, I suffer from a little bit of ADHD, and there's no necessarily harm associated with it. But that doesn't mean, like you say, you got to be careful on how you do it. That's why we prefer therapeutic. You need to have someone that's watching over you. You need to have someone who's trained, who knows how to handle emergencies, who has contacts, where they can call someone. Like someone needs to know what they're doing, in order for them to be guiding you, because you don't want to be thinking about it. You want to be able to just let yourself go, but you need to be with a trusted person to be able to handle that for you. And that's where we come in. That's the reason we exist, is we want to make sure that everybody is able to get access to this as safely as possible. So we don't call ourselves, there's a lot of people who call themselves sort of a harm reduction. Yes, we're a harm reduction service, but fundamentally we are a risk reduction service, right? We try to reduce the risk associated with nothing. Like I said, nothing's ever risk-free. There's no zero risk here, So we want to make sure that people coming to us are, clear about why they're coming to us. And we want to make sure that they are ready. And if they're not ready, they're not going to be. We advise them, say, hey, you know what? You need to go figure out why you're doing this. If you're just doing it for recreational, I'm not the place to come to. Like, right. I'm not here to recreate. I will advise you on how to do that, but that's not what we exist. We exist because we want people to come in with a therapeutic intent, not a recreational intent. And so that's what we look at.
So how did you get into this?
Yeah, good question. I got into it, like I said, in 2015, when I ended up telling my story. I think that's when things started for me. That's when I started sort of exploring, why I'm here, what is my mission, what's my purpose in life. I was just not fulfilled in any way. At that time, I was making money in Silicon Valley. I was married to a beautiful woman. I had a house. Everything was, by all external measures, I was very successful. So I should have been like completely happy, but I wasn't. There was things just missing. I just didn't know what was missing, and I think that's when I started investigating things about that. But it wasn't until 2017, when I was at an Oregon music festival for the Eclipse, that somebody gave me something. I didn't even know what it was. I had never taken anything. I had not smoked weed. I had not taken any drugs, anything up until 2017. I'd done none of that. I grew up in a very conservative family, Indian family household. Drugs were just, anything related to drugs was called, everything targeted as drugs was bad. So when I was there in 2017, somebody handed me something and I was among friends, so I took it. And I was like, for the first time in my life, I was a 5-year-old adult body, and I loved every freaking moment of it. It was like I was completely liberated. I was completely free. And I never felt anything like that in my entire life. And I'm an engineer by background, so I'm a technical person. I grew up as an engineer. The first thing I did after that was saying, okay, what the heck was that? And and then I started investigating and researching about it. So then I started reading a lot of material on the entire psychedelic space and all the substances. I came across Michael Pollan's book called How to Change Your Mind. I was in Colombia in 2018. I almost ended up going to an ayahuasca ceremony. The shaman didn't show, which probably, fortunately or unfortunately, that was a good thing. But that's when I'd never been to a therapist. I started looking to find a therapist because I wanted to go to a therapy session. But it took me 3 years to find someone to help me. And the process was very complex. There was a lot of friction in the process to find somebody who could actually help me with this. I didn't want to take pharma because I've seen my sister and seen my nephew go through that, and I knew people that had taken that. So I didn't want that route for myself. And I basically was on a search to find somebody. And because it took me that long, I even went to MAPS. They have integration therapists. You can search for it, but there's 1,000 integration therapists. How do I know who should I even first contact? And are they the right person for me? No idea. I didn't even know what questions to ask, So I was completely flying blind at the time. Luckily, I did find somebody in early of 2020. And so I went through my therapy sessions, and I had set a time to do my first session with her with MDMA in June of 2020. And then I was ready, set to go. Then my mom dies in June of 2020. So I had to postpone that and deal with her death. And, I had to go talk to her about things and deal with all the estate and, everything like that. So I postponed it till October of 2020. And so I had my first MDMA session in October of 2020. And it was the most beautiful, dreamlike experience for me. It was the whole experience was taking place underwater in a dream state. And I'm scared to death of deep water, but the whole experience was in deep water. And I wasn't scared. I was riding horses at the bottom of the ocean. It was just absolutely the most beautiful thing that I've ever experienced. And I came out of that just being open to everything. But I still felt like that was the start of the process and not the end of it. And then I did another session with her in January of 2021, which was a combination of MDMA and psilocybin, 4.5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. And that was also a very good experience. I had no bad experiences, but that was a good one. And then, but I told her, I felt like my arm and my shoulders out of my shell, but I'm not completely out of it. So there's something still going on. I'm kind of feeling this stuck sensation. And so we did, the next session was June of 2021 with 7 grams of mushrooms, and just the doors freaking just blew open for me. I mean, I literally cried for 4.5 hours. That's the first time I actually grieved like literally grieved for my mom.
Mm.
I cried because I finally could understand what she has been trying to tell me all of these years, and I didn't understood as a child. That's the first time I could be here. I was transported to her as a child, living in a refugee camp, watching her mom die.
Mm.
And so I was just, I finally understood what real pain and real sadness felt like, which I had never experienced or felt. This was the first time I could actually feel that. This is the first time I could feel what love felt like. This is the first time I could feel what ecstasy felt like. This is the first time I could feel what pure joy and bliss felt like. This is the first time I could feel all of those emotions. And all of these emotions were rolled up into one. Each emotion allowed me to switch into different dimensions. That was the most profound experience of my life. And in the whole process, when I woke up, I told my therapist, the world needs to know about this because this is super powerful. It changed me completely, changed who I was, allowed me to be a better person. And that's the quest that I've been on, just be a better version of myself. 3 months later, Mind Lumen was born. The idea for Mind Lumen was born almost 3 months later. And so I've been in like beta for the last couple of years, trying to make this happen. And I wanted to make sure that people who are going to come to this don't have the same friction and the same navigation problem that I had. And there's plenty of people that are in a situation like me, who don't know what questions to ask, who don't know how to navigate, who don't know, are scared and want to understand. And there's a lot of information out there, they can look it up, but that's kind of meaningless if you don't know how to make sense of it. And so that's what I wanted to set out to do. I wanted to make sure that I took the seeker's perspective because I was a seeker. Right. It allowed me, that's the reason I didn't become I could have gone and become a facilitator myself and become a therapist myself. But I chose not to do that because I didn't want to have any inherent conflicts of interest. I don't want to be recruiting patients and clients to myself, So I basically decided that I'm going to focus on the seekers because that's the person that I want to understand. And that's the person that I do understand because that's the process that I went through and the difficulty of it. So that's why I decided to do Mind Lumen the way I'm doing it.
So we were talking a little bit before I pressed record about the Asian emotional experience and starting the Asian Psychedelic Society. And so I heard your story before, but you came to America from India when you were 15 and started college when you were 16 in the Midwest. And so you have deep experiences, both of the American experience and the Asian experience. So I had a lot of really potent things to say about the Asian emotional experience. Would you speak to that again?
Yeah, I didn't even when I left India, I kind of had abandoned my own culture because it was a very traumatic time for me. And, because I was sent to a British military academy at the age of 4.5. My parents, put me on a plane and handed me off to a flight attendant and say, yeah, it's time for you to go to school, So the flight attendants, took me, I didn't even know who was with me on the plane at the time. And they handed me off to my uncle. My uncle put me on a train and then the other end of the train station, 3 hours later, I was met by somebody on the train platform. The only picture of me as a child was crying on the train station. And then I got put in a bus, and the bus was behind these cages. They went in through to this gate with the cast iron gates, and the walls had broken glass on all over in it. And I basically was like, okay, I'm 4.5, I'm going to prison. I mean, I later on realized that 4.5, we don't really realize these things. But basically, that's what it felt like. And I was in this British military boarding school for 9 months out of every year. So I only saw my parents twice a year at 4.5 months. So I basically saw them in the summer for 2 months and in the winter for 3 weeks. And I only saw them that way from the time I was 4.5 till I graduated high school, So I didn't see my parents in the entire time. And I was the youngest, so all my siblings were older. They were in the same school, but they were all teenagers or preteens. What do they want to do with a 4.5-year-old? Nothing. So they didn't even talk to me during the whole time that I was in school, or that's what I felt like. So I kind of grew up by myself, and I had this sort of later on realize that I felt like just being abandoned. So when I came to this country at 16, I just wanted to come here and go to school and study, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. When I landed in the Midwest, and so it's like I'm one of 20 people of color in a university that's like 2,300 students. Luckily, I was an athlete. But I had 2 years of like depression because I'd never seen snow before in my life. It was cold, it's miserable. I didn't know how to fit in everything. But then, I was able to join the soccer team and the tennis team, and that's how my name got into the papers, and that's how I built relationships. So it was good, but I was very lonely, so none of this I connected to anything. I just kind of adapted to the situation. And it wasn't until probably 2021, 2022 that I started to sort of look back at this trauma experience and not forgive my parents, but just understand their perspective. They were trying to do the right thing for me. They wanted me to have a good education. And so they sent me to a school where I could get a good education. And luckily I did get a good education because that allowed me to have a career in Silicon Valley. But my social experience, obviously wasn't that great. My relationships, to tell you how I had completely abandoned my own culture in India, like I never dated a single Asian person or an Indian person the entire time that I lived in the US. And because I didn't want anything to do with it, and so this was crazy, and then I realized later on that no, there's so many good cultural aspects, and like I said to you before, dealing with my own mental health issues, there's no translation for mental health in Asian languages. It's a very Western phrase, and it doesn't really apply. Most of the research being done in these clinical trials with psychedelics, not a lot of Asians in those clinical trials. So it's like there's a lot of stigma associated with being Asian. So you can't say that you have a mental health problem because it's sort of very stigmatized. So whereas maybe Americans and Europeans can talk about mental health, and now it's very freely talked about, even today in Asian societies, even Asian societies that are in the Bay Area, which is heavily populated by Asians, there's still a deep stigma associated with it coming out to your parents or your siblings or anyone else. It's a very cultural stigmatization issue, So part of that, the reason I started the Bay Area Asian Psychedelic Society is to give Asians a safe space to talk about their feelings and talk about their emotions, because I'm talking about my feelings and my emotions, and that's why I'm out in the open, because I want other people to let them know that, hey, here's an Indian brown guy can talk about his emotions pretty openly, pretty freely, and hopefully that gives other people the latitude to be able to go do that. But I'm trying to do that both in Thailand here and in the Bay Area. And so I started this organization, in June with others, obviously. And we created a group of people, and the goal was to meet people in person, because we think when you meet people in person, you develop deeper connections, and relationships, so while my life is super chaotic at the moment, and has been for the last few years, because I'm in the middle of a divorce. I make no money. I have no job. I'm moving across country, and I'm living in Thailand. It's very chaotic, but at the same time, I'm about as in a beautiful state of bliss as I can be. So I'm in a wonderful state of flow at the moment, and it's even in spite of the chaos. And the organization, the bringing Asians together, is something that's very, very important to me. And I'm now like reconnecting with my own culture. That's one of the reasons I'm here in Thailand. So things are coming together in a really beautiful way. And I hope to continue that effort as part of the effort that I'm working with Mind Lumen on. So
it's so powerful, that there's not even language, that there aren't words for mental health or emotional health in Asian languages. There was a beautiful story about, how our consciousness and being able to have words for things really allows us to have conceptualization, and it's outside of our awareness to even think about that. Like they were talking about some remote tribe, and they showed them imagery that had a square in it, and there are no squares in nature by its own accord. They're a human created thing, and the people, they would describe the pictures and they didn't describe the square because they had no language for it. And they actually, once they described and told them like that's a square, they were like, oh, they actually didn't even really register it because they didn't have words for it. It's kind of like when we share living in San Francisco for a long time, a lot of Asian language around, Korean signs and Chinese signs for things. And I don't look at them because I can't read what it says. And so there's a way I don't even register what it is without having the language or understanding what the language is. So it's so powerful to, this is really groundbreaking. And I'm all about the evolution of consciousness to help really, a huge percentage of the population in the world, in your own way, to begin to have language and to begin to go deeper within themselves and to find this expansion of experience and the healing and the depth of connection with ourselves and others and the larger system. It's just so beautiful what you're doing. And I think about, we'll leave them unnamed, but I think we know a similar person who recently fled China. They were doing a lot of, cutting edge therapy and transpersonal and spiritual work. And they had an event, it was like a meditation event with like 60 people. And someone reported them to the authorities and everyone was arrested and they were treated like criminals and they were brought to different police stations terrifyingly and held and questioned. And some people had to flee and others are actually in prison for doing this kind of, not even psychedelic. As a matter of fact, there's a person who just got a life sentence for serving psychedelics in China, who you may be aware of as well, right? And so it's certainly not dangerous where you are in Thailand, but it was speaking, even when you talk about Nixon and the laws that we have in this country, we're afraid of what we don't know. We're afraid of what we don't understand. And it feels very threatening to the status quo. And so it's demonized. And I just really applaud it's just so beautiful, the work that you're doing and offering your own experience out into the world. And even though you might not have the big tech job and some things in that structure have fallen away, I can see how happy you are and that you're supported. I know you have a community and we get supported in different ways to find joy and fulfillment besides having a big house and a Tesla.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel very fortunate, very, very fortunate to have a wonderful community and wonderful people that are in my life. And, psychedelics is, it's like I said, it's a catalyst, but without the therapeutic experience, it'll just be a catalyst. But for me, with the therapeutic experience, all my breakthroughs have come with a therapeutic setting and a therapeutic experience. That's where all my breakthroughs came. And that's where I've learned to integrate things. Like I've gone in with an intention, I've gone in with the right mindset and the setting, and I've done the integration work after it, right? It's not something that I take lightly. So every therapeutic experience, I've integrated that experience and I've continued to evolve as a human being to be a better version of myself. And I know that that's a never-ending cycle. There's no such thing as an end because there's so many layers of the onion still to be discovered, and I'm just peeling layers off just to learn new things about myself and how I want to live and how I want to be with other people. I've let more people, Renee, into my life than at any other time. More and more people have come into my life, even though I know there will be some people that will hurt me. There'll be some people that disappoint me. There'll some people that betray my trust. There'll some people will be manipulative. In spite of all of that, majority of the people that comes into my life are actually, genuinely nice people. If you let them in, you're open and you're vulnerable. And vulnerability is a strength. And a lot of Asians think vulnerability is not a strength. So and since then, yes, I've dated dated Asians, since my separation. So it's like, it's been, and I've talked to one of them, and she basically said to her, showing the vulnerability, she felt it was a weakness, and I said, it's actually not. It's actually gives you power. It's one of your strengths. You can take it, and because you're not afraid of your emotions, you're not afraid of being open and being vulnerable, and that's completely okay. And that has allowed me to be that way, and that's given me the sense of nice, quiet confidence, sort of what I call an egoless confidence. You're kind of within yourself. You know yourself better, and you don't have to put anybody else down. It's driven by more internal factors than external factors.
Mhm.
And so that's how I live my life now, and it's a beautiful way to live my life. And it's done so much for me that I think, and other people as well. There's lots of people I've talked to that have gone through this. It's changed their life in such a dramatic way. It's not perfect, right? I mean, I've also said to people, like, if you're an asshole, you can come out a bigger asshole by going and taking psychedelics. You still have to have the right intentions going in, and if you don't integrate and don't do the work of integration, then you've just spent a whole bunch of money for nothing. Yeah, you've had a nice experience. Then you might as well do it recreationally. Like, what's the difference? It doesn't really matter. But for me, it matters a great deal. And there's a lot of people that want to do this therapeutically. And that's who really I care about, to make sure that they can do it safely and ethically.
It's so beautiful. I mean, my whole life is dedicated to helping people transform, also in the way that I have been transformed by being able to connect with this larger consciousness system that actually has our highest good in mind. And we can connect with the possibility of healing, which I also didn't know was possible. I grew up in a culture that was like, you don't show your feelings and you just suck it up and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if you can't, well, too bad. And it was interesting, I had a potential client call me this week who's also an engineer. And he said, so are you going to try to talk to my unconscious? And I tried to tell him about my work, which again is a sister parallel with psychedelics, although it's using the tools of shamanism and body-centered mindfulness rather than using psychedelics. But we go to very much the same place. And he really couldn't understand what I was saying. And I said, listen, I'll send you a free download of the first chapters of my book, which we'll put in the show notes. And there's a free inner journey that goes with that. And, this is the inner journey work. And I didn't expect to hear back from him, but he texted me just yesterday. And he said, so the first inner journey is to connect with an aspect of nature. And because we're all children of nature, right? This is, again, this transpersonal, not intellectual, it's like non-intellectual experience. And so he says, I found myself in a lagoon, rinsing in a steamy water, and it was being fed by a waterfall. And there were beautiful venomous snakes that couldn't hurt me. And there were beautiful, colorful flying creatures and a woman that's similar to the woman on the cover of my book. And I felt perfect warm beams of light from the fading sun. And I felt strong and at peace. And I felt like I could live forever without getting old. And this is the realms that we can bring people to, whether we do it psychedelic assisted or through other technologies. And everybody has access to these incredible healing, wisdom expanding, and transformational realms. And I'm so like happy for the people that you serve, and so many blessings on the work that you're doing. It's really, really wonderful, Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. Yeah, it's there's so many wonderful people doing wonderful work in this space. So it's like I'm not the only one, right? It's like a lot of people are doing amazing things. Yes, like anything in life, there's some bad apples, but most people are doing good work. And they're conscientious in doing that. And like I said, I've only got so many years to live on this planet.
Mhm.
I'm going to do what I can, and then I'm going to be dead. I'm not afraid of being dead, so it's fine. And that's why I'm going to eventually build a foundation, and then most of the stuff is going to be left to the foundation to carry on the work beyond me. And that's, that's the best I can do in the time that I have left on this planet. And, I'm not trying to boil the ocean. I'm not, I don't have these things that I could go, some days it may not even be my best, but my goal always every day is to look at myself in the mirror and go, yeah, did I do what I could? And do I feel good about doing what I could? And can I sleep at night without having any regrets? And if I can do that, I've done what I'm supposed to do. And it feels good to me. I'm going to do what feels good to me. That's what I'm going to do. And that's it. Next day I get up and do some more. And each day, hopefully I'm putting one Lego block on top of another and building a foundation. And that's essentially what my plan is. Beyond that, I'm not thinking too far ahead. I know what the end goal is. I know what I'm trying to do. I may not achieve it in my lifetime. It's perfectly okay that I may not achieve it in my lifetime, and that's okay. But what I hopefully can do is build enough of a foundation that somebody else can carry on the work beyond me. And that's what I can do.
I'm actually trying to do the same thing with my mentorship program. So awesome. So how can people get in touch with you? We'll certainly have links to everything down in the show notes, but why don't you just run by different ways people can get in touch with you to be helped?
Yeah, the best way is just to go to the website, mindlumen.health. If you're a seeker wanting to start a journey, there's a button there that says start your journey. You can do that. If you're a facilitator or a retreat or a clinic and you want to be part of the community, there's a link there that says join our community. And that's the best way. If you want to get in touch with us via email, just send an email to help@mindlumen.health. And that's the best way you can reach us. So.
And what about the Asian Psychedelic Society?
So the Asian Psychedelic Society, if you're in the Bay Area, then and you want to get together in person, then reach out to me directly via either my Instagram or Twitter, preferably Instagram. Okay, and I can give you the Instagram links to there. But if they reach out to me there, I'll connect them to the Asian Psychedelic Society if they're living in the Bay Area.
Awesome. Neil, so like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And Neil, it was so great to have you here. And best of luck and good wishes for everything that you're doing. It's really wonderful work in the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee. It's been a pleasure being with you.